Hello, dear attendees of Cerasil Intercultural Competence Conference. My name is Maria Kostromitina, and I'm a second year MA TESOL student at Northern Arizona University. Today, I would like to present to you the results of my study called The Structure of Service Encounter Requests in Russian, German, and American English. This study started 2 years ago when I was a student at Bonn University, and at that time I was able to collect some data of service encounter requests in Russian and German, and I was able to also compare the data. However, after coming to the US, I collected data in American English, and I was able to add this third component to my research, which I would like to present to you today. I would like to start my presentation with some background on service encounter requests and the cultural dimensions theory by Hofstadter, which was used to analyze the results of the data collection and its analysis. After that, I'll talk about the method of my study and explain how the data was coded, and then I'll move on to overviewing my results and concluding my research. When looking at the question, my main topic of the research, two questions may arise. First, why requests at all? And second, why Russian, English, and German? Expanding globalization has highlighted the need for cross-cultural research and politeness within linguistic structures. I believe that prediction and prevention of possible misunderstandings between speakers can occur when the speakers are aware of those cultural differences, especially within performing speech acts. And before I move on to talking about the speech act of service encounter requests, let's remind ourselves what requests are, especially through the lens of Brown and Levinson's politeness theory. Requests are face-threatening acts which hold high social stakes for both the speaker and the hearer. Requests must be socially appropriate, and this condition can be realized by using indirect request strategies and internal and external mitigating devices. And these are the components of requests that I analyzed in my study. In particular, I focused on service encounter requests, which can be defined as conversations between people for a transactional exchange. Service encounter requests are usually divided into two subgroups: requests for information and requests for action. They are standard situations where the roles of the speaker and the hearer are fixed, the obligations are defined, and the probability of compliance is pretty high. Moving on to my next question, why German, Russian, and American English? I was able to find a lot of studies that focused on requests in American or British English, German, and French. However, there are little to no studies that focus on Russian, and even less studies comparing the aforementioned languages. However, according to the European Union official website, the European Union exports to Russia totaled to 103.3 billion euros and to 181.3 billion euros looking at the exports from Russia to the European Union. And also there is really close interaction on the cultural and social levels between Europe and Russia, and America plays a huge role in both exports and cultural and social interactions with these two countries as well. In this particular study, the main idea was to explore cross-cultural variation in realization of German, Russian, and American English service encounter requests. Particularly, I was interested in the extent to which the variable of degree of imposition influences the informant's directness in the situations under analysis. The focus of analysis was differences between request strategies, the request perspective, as well as the amount and type of internal and external mitigation in requests employed by German, Russian, and American English native speakers. Um, before I start discussing and describing the methodology of my study, let's have a look at the cultural dimensions theory, which was developed by Gerhard Hofstede, a famous linguist and scientist from the Netherlands. So as you can see, Hofstede developed the six-dimensional model, which is able to describe any culture or any country within six dimensions: power, distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. And the website of the researcher also offers the feature of comparing the of the countries of interest. So I was able to create this graph on the website, and of particular interest for this study are the dimensions of power, distance, and uncertainty avoidance. And as you can see, within these two dimensions, Russia scored pretty high, meaning that the power relations within the Russian culture are very important, especially in communication between people whose power distance is pretty high. And for uncertainty avoidance, Russian speakers prefer to avoid uncertainty in conversations and usually like the main points or the conversation to have a clear meaning, and for the interactions and for utterances to be pretty clear. Moving on to the methodology, my research instrument was the production questionnaire, which consisted of written discourse completion tasks or DCTs. Six situations were offered to informants, and they elicited four service and counter requests and two responses to complements. Within the four situations of service and counter requests, there were two requests for action and two requests for information. In the table, you can see the questionnaire design. The six situations were offered, as I've said. Situations number 2 and 4 were distractors, and I did not analyze them. And then situations 1 and 6 are requests for information, which are low degree of imposition requests, compared to situations 3 and 5. Presenting requests for action, and since the action is required from the hearer, I considered these two situations to be high imposition requests. This is an example of a discourse completion task from the German version of my questionnaire. This is the third situation, and the context is at the supermarket, and the situation is described as follows. You have bought a lot of groceries, and you cannot fit everything in one bag, and then some lines are provided for the informant to fill out their response, and then a rejoinder states, and these are the words of the sales assistant: yes, of course, here you go. So hopefully, I was hoping that this situation would yield in a request for an additional bag from the speaker. 20 native speakers of German, Russian, and 17 native speakers of American English were invited to take part in the questionnaire, and they were all pretty much the same age, with Russian group averaging at 24 years, and then the German group being a little bit younger with 21.5 years, and the youngest was the American group of informants, with the average age of 18.35 years. In the end, 78 instances of Russian requests were collected, together with 77 instances with German requests and 68 instances of American English requests. The data was then coded using a modified version of the CCS ARP coding scheme initially worked out by Blum-Kalka. Since Blum-Kalka focused on requests in general, a more specific scheme was needed, and so the degrees of directness developed by econometer cities were used to code the service encounter requests according to the degree of directness. So as you can see, the arrow shows that the most indirect strategies of realizing requests are strong and mild hints for both requests for information and requests for action, and the most direct strategies of realizing these requests are direct question in requests for information and imperatives and mood derivables for requests for action. Here you can see an example of coding the data. This is one of the responses collected with a questionnaire. Situation 5, German respondents. So the situation says, Entschuldigung, ich habe mich in meiner Bestellung vertan. Könnte ich etwas anderes bestellen? Which is translated into, excuse me, I made a mistake in my order. Could I order something else? So as we can see that the request starts with an alerter, Entschuldigung, or excuse me. After that, we can see the had act strategy in purple, which is query preparatory strategy, and the perspective is speaker dominance. So ich meaning I. The had act strategy is internally modified by conditional könnte or could. Finally, external modification was also used, and the external modifications are also called supporting moves. In this case, it was the grounder. Ich habe mich in meiner Bestellung vertan. I made a mistake in my order. So the speaker had to explain why the request is being made before actually making the request. All right, let's move on to the results of my study. And first, I would like to focus on the headache strategy choice. We can see that the three cultures had similar tendencies in choosing the headache strategy choices. Well, the choice of head strategy realizations. So for low imposition requests, all three cultures prefer direct questions, and then for high imposition requests for action, the most popular headache strategy was query preparatory. As for the request perspective, interesting results were detected as well. For low imposition requests, all three cultures and all three languages, informants from all three languages preferred hero dominance. However, for high imposition requests, speakers of German and American English use speaker dominance, so they mostly talked about themselves, and the pronoun I was the most common, whereas for Russian native speakers, impersonal request perspective was the most common. Now let's move on to the internal mitigation of headache strategies. So the distribution of syntactic mitigation and headache strategies of service and counter requests showed the following yielded in the following graph. For low imposition requests, American speakers of American English use syntactic downgraders more often than speakers of Russian and German, and for high imposition requests, German speakers and American English speakers use a pretty similar amount of syntactic downgrading. Looking at the types of syntactic downgrading in more detail, we can see that, interestingly, German native speakers mostly use conditionals for situations 1 and 6, so for low imposition requests. And for high imposition requests, they also use conditionals a lot. It was actually the only syntactic downgrading device that was used by speakers of German, compared to American native speakers, for example, which use both conditionals and interrogatives in low imposition requests and almost exclusively interrogatives in high imposition requests. Moving on to lexical and phrasal internal downgrading, we can see that again for high imposition requests in general, lexical and phrasal downgrading was used more often, and for low imposition requests, both all the three groups of speakers used less lexical and phrasal downgrading. Here are some of the examples of how and what particular strategies for lexical and phrasal downgrading the speakers used. One of them was the downtoner, um, and then politeness markers and understaters. And this table presents the distribution of lexical and phrasal downgraders within the headache strategies in service encounter requests. Interestingly, Russian speakers used the politeness marker please in all cases when lexical and phrasal downgrading was used. Um, Also, speakers of American English use this politeness marker exclusively for lexical and phrasal downgrading. So as we can see, the choice of how to downgrade or what mitigation devices to use for the American English speakers group was not really varied, and they mostly focused on one strategy compared to German speakers who showed a variety of lexical and phrasal downgrading strategies. The final element of service encounter requests that I focused on was supportive moves. And the graph that you can see on the screen presents the analysis of the collected data with regards to this element of service encounter requests. Interestingly, German speakers used more supportive moves in low imposition requests compared to high imposition requests, and speakers of American English use comparatively more supportive moves in both types of imposition requests compared to speakers of Russian and German. Unfortunately, no statistical analysis was conducted, so I cannot say whether the difference was significant or not, but hopefully some statistical analysis will be conducted in the nearest future to update the result. The 5 most common supportive moves used in all service encounter requests were a grounder, which again, as I've said earlier, provides a reason for the request. The imposition minimizer, for example, if possible. Getting a pre-commitment, so establishing the ground of the request, or getting a permission to actually make the request, the disarmer, and promise of reward. And you have some of the examples from the data that was collected. An interesting observation is that American English requests, service encounter requests, showed double apologies, excuse me, I'm sorry, in high imposition requests. Granted that excuse me might be an alerter just to attract the attention of the speaker of the hearer. I'm sorry was probably the beginning of the actual request. However, this combination of the two phrases was very common across all types of service across high imposition service encounter requests in American English. Now that I've talked about the components of service encounter requests and their analysis, let's sum up what we've been talking about. In general, all 3 groups of service encounter requests demonstrated surprisingly similar choice of realization strategies, with query preparatory being the most popular one, and it belongs to the conventionally indirect strategies. So in general, all 3 groups of speakers preferred conventionally indirect strategy in both types of requests, and they were especially high in American requests for action. Depending on the degree of imposition, however, high imposition requests for information used query preparatory strategy, but low imposition requests for action mostly demonstrated direct question strategy, with query preparatory still being pretty high. So, with regards to the request perspective, the low imposition requests were mostly hearer oriented across all 3 cultures, whereas high imposition requests demonstrated different perspectives, so speaker perspective in German and American English, and impersonal perspective in Russian. And this result can be confirmed by Blom-Kalka's results and Allstein's results, which said that avoiding naming the addressee as the principal performer of the requested act serves to soften the impact of the imposition. So it is pretty obvious looking at the results by Blum, Kalka, and Olstein, why speakers of all three cultures did not choose the hero-oriented perspective in high imposition requests. Um, It was also interesting that there was higher level of internal and external mitigation on the back of the conventionally indirect query preparatory strategy, which means that there was a higher degree of indirectness in American service encounter requests. Surprisingly, Russian service encounters were also more indirect than German, and this finding contradicts previous studies, which have found Russian to be genuinely direct. However, it supports Hofstede's claim, Hofstede, the creator of the cultural dimensions theory, that the higher level of collectivism and uncertainty avoidance in Russian society can motivate higher indirectness in out-group communication. It also supports previous studies demonstrating that despite high level of directness in German requests, still the most frequently used type of request is conventionally indirect, which is query preparatory. However, the results contradict Hofstede's description of American communication as more direct, and we've seen that American speakers used a lot of supportive moves more than the speakers of the two other cultures, and also a lot of a syntactic downgrading within the speech actualization strategies. In conclusion, can we say that native speakers of American English are more polite than native speakers of Russian and German? It all depends on the cultural differences. Something that's accepted in one culture may not be accepted in the other culture. Also, speakers usually follow socio-pragmatic interactional principles according to Spencer Odie 2003, and these principles usually exist within different societies. A lot depends of the social groups and the representatives of the social groups having an interaction. Besides, males and females have very sharp and sharply distinct social roles in Russian society, and this could also play a role in the way they realize service encounter requests. Also, we should not exclude the methodology limitations. Only specific social groups were informed. They were mostly students in all three countries, and maybe within other social groups, different service encounter requests would have been collected. But definitely more studies needed within the area of service encounter requests in these cultures as well as within other cultures. Because, as I said earlier, these studies can prove very effective in cross-cultural communication and can definitely prevent misunderstandings if we make speakers aware of these socio-pragmatic interactional differences within different cultures. Here is the list of my references, and thank you so much for your attention. Please don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions or would like to look closely at my data. My email is mk782@nau.edu. Thank you again for watching my presentation. Have a good rest of your day.